The distress signal. The endless darkness of space was calm as Commander Jack Harper leaned back in his captain's chair aboard the Starblade. It was supposed to be a routine patrol mission, a simple task for the seasoned explorer and his small but loyal crew. Jack enjoyed these moments of quiet. The hum of the ship's engines and the faint glow of the control panels made the vast emptiness of space feel less lonely. But peace was never meant to last. "Commander," came a sharp voice from the navigation console. It was Sarah Kane, the ship's navigator, her eyes fixed on the screen in front of her. "We're picking up a signal. It's faint but urgent. I think it's a distress call." Jack leaned forward, the calm in his expression replaced by alertness. "Source." Sarah's fingers danced over the console. "It's coming from the Zyranian sector. Deep space, uncharted territory for us." The mention of Zyranians sent a ripple of unease through the crew. The Zyranians were a mysterious alien race, known for their secrecy and advanced technology. They rarely interacted with humans, and when they did, it was with cold distrust. "Zyranians?" muttered Ethan, the ship's engineer, scratching his beard. "They're not exactly the friendly type. Why would we want to get involved?" Jack stood up, his sharp eyes locked on the screen. "Distress signals don't ask for opinions, Ethan. Someone's in trouble, and we're the closest ship. We don't ignore that." "But, Commander," Sarah said hesitantly, "this could be a trap. There's no way to confirm the signal's authenticity." Jack considered this. She was right. It could be a setup. Space was full of dangers, and trust was a rare commodity. But his instincts, honed from years of navigating the unknown, told him this was different. "What does the message say?" Jack asked. Sarah amplified the signal. The bridge filled with a faint, crackling voice, speaking in a language that was both strange and oddly melodic. The ship's translator worked to decode it, and soon the words came through in English. "Help. Princess Elara. Zyran. Danger. Urgent." The word princess caught everyone's attention. Zyranian royalty. This was no ordinary distress call. "Princess Elara," Jack repeated, a flicker of curiosity crossing his face. Why would a Zyranian princess call for help, and why to us? Before anyone could answer, the signal cut out abruptly, leaving a haunting silence. "Well, that's not ominous," Ethan grumbled. Jack turned to his crew, his decision made. "Set a course for the signal's origin. We'll find out what's going on." The Starblade roared to life, its sleek frame slicing through the black void of space. The coordinates led them to a remote, desolate planet shrouded in thick, swirling clouds. As they approached, the planet's surface came into view, a barren wasteland marked by jagged mountains and glowing symbols etched into the ground. "Those symbols, they look ancient," Sarah said, her voice tinged with awe. "Zyranian markings," Jack confirmed. "We're in the right place." The ship touched down cautiously, its landing gears kicking up dust and debris. Jack grabbed his plasma rifle and motioned for his team to follow. "Stay sharp. We don't know what's waiting for us down there." The crew stepped out onto the rocky terrain, their boots crunching against the ground. The air was thick and heavy, carrying an eerie stillness that made every sound seem louder. "This place gives me the creeps," Ethan muttered, holding his scanner tightly. Jack moved ahead, his eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance, he spotted something unusual, a small, makeshift structure partially hidden by rocks. He signaled the crew to follow. As they approached, they found the remnants of a battle. Burned-out vehicles and shattered weapons littered the area. The glowing symbols on the ground pulsed faintly, as if alive. "What happened here?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Before Jack could answer, a sudden rustling noise broke the silence. The crew froze, weapons at the ready. The sound grew louder, coming from all around them. "We're not alone," Jack said grimly. Out of the shadows, figures emerged, tall, armored warriors with sharp, glowing weapons. Their alien features marked them as Zyranians, their piercing eyes locked on Jack and his team. The lead warrior raised his weapon and spoke in the Zyranian tongue. The translator struggled to keep up but managed to convey the message. Human intruders, surrender or face the consequences. Jack didn't flinch. "We're here to help Princess Elara," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the tension. The Zyranians exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Then, without warning, they lowered their weapons. "You will come with us," the leader said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jack and his crew exchanged uneasy looks but followed, weapons still in hand. The warriors led them through a hidden passage that opened into a large underground sanctuary. And there, standing tall despite the chains that bound her, was Princess Elara. Her silver hair shimmered like starlight, and her deep, glowing eyes met Jack's with a mix of hope and desperation. "You came," she said softly, her voice carrying both relief and urgency. Jack nodded. "We heard your call. What's going on here?" Before she could answer, the ground shook violently, and the sound of distant explosions echoed through the cavern. "They've found us," Elara said, her voice trembling. "The rebels are here." Jack tightened his grip on his weapon, his resolve hardening. "Then we'd better get moving." The alien princess, deep in the underground sanctuary, the air felt alive with tension. The dim glow of bioluminescent crystals illuminated the walls, casting strange shadows that flickered like ghosts. Jack Harper stood in the middle of the cavern, his gaze fixed on the figure before him. Princess Elara was unlike anyone, or anything, Jack had ever seen. Her shimmering silver hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her glowing eyes seemed to pierce into his very soul. Her presence was commanding, even as the chains on her wrists betrayed her vulnerability. "I didn't think a human would answer my call," Elara said, her voice calm yet laced with exhaustion. Jack crossed his arms, his posture casual but his mind sharp. "We don't usually get calls from Zyranian royalty. What's this about, Princess?" Elara hesitated, her glowing eyes darting toward the Zyranian warriors who had brought Jack and his crew to the sanctuary. She seemed to weigh her words carefully, as though speaking them aloud could summon new dangers. "The rebels," she began, her voice firm despite her evident fatigue. "They want to overthrow my family and seize control of Ziran. I escaped, but they've been hunting me ever since." "Why send a distress signal to humans?" Jack asked, suspicion creeping into his tone. "Your people don't exactly trust us." Elara's gaze softened, and for the first time, Jack saw something he hadn't expected. "Fear, because I had no choice. The rebels are using technology we've never seen before. It's ancient, powerful, and human." The room fell silent. Jack's crew exchanged uneasy glances. "Human." Sarah Kane, the navigator, broke the silence. "How's that possible? We've never been to Ziran, let alone shared technology." Elara's chains rattled softly as she stepped forward, her eyes locking onto Jack. "I was told of a prophecy, long ago. It speaks of a human who would come to Ziran in its darkest hour, a savior who would restore balance. When I sent the signal, I didn't know if anyone would answer. But now, here you are." Jack frowned. "Prophecies, ancient tech. Princess, I don't believe in fairy tales. If you need help, you're going to have to give me more to work with." Before Elara could respond, the ground trembled violently, shaking loose dust and rocks from the cavern ceiling. The faint sound of explosions echoed from the surface, growing louder with each passing second. "They found us," one of the Zyranian warriors announced, his voice tense. Elara's expression hardened, the fear in her eyes replaced by determination. "We don't have much time. The rebels will destroy everything to get to me. If they capture this sanctuary, it's over." Jack turned to his crew. "Ethan, Sarah, get back to the Starblade. Prep it for takeoff." "What about you?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with worry. "I'm staying with the princess," Jack said firmly. He looked at Elara. "If we're going to get out of this alive, I need to know exactly what we're up against." Elara nodded, motioning for one of the warriors to unlock her chains. As the restraints fell away, a faint glow radiated from her skin, illuminating the cavern. "What is that?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "My connection to the artifact," Elara said. "It's what the rebels are after. And if they get it—" She trailed off, her expression grim. "Then let's make sure they don't," Jack said, gripping his plasma rifle. Suddenly, a deafening explosion tore through the cavern, sending debris flying. Rebel soldiers poured into the sanctuary, their weapons blazing. "Move," Jack shouted, firing at the incoming attackers. The Zyranian warriors joined the fight, their glowing blades slicing through the chaos. Amid the battle, Jack grabbed Elara's arm. "We need to get to the artifact. Now." "This way." Elara led him down a narrow tunnel, the sounds of the battle fading behind them. They emerged into a smaller chamber, where a pedestal stood in the center. Upon it rested a strange, pulsating object, a sphere of light and metal that seemed both ancient and alive. "That's it?" Jack asked, his breath catching. Elara nodded. "The heart of Ziran. It's the key to our survival and our destruction." Jack reached for the artifact, but Elara stopped him. "It's dangerous. Only those with Zyranian blood can touch it safely." Jack glanced back at the tunnel, where the sounds of battle were drawing closer. "Then what do we do?" Elara placed her hands on the artifact, and the glow around her intensified. The walls of the chamber seemed to hum in response. "We fight back." The rebels stormed into the room, their leader at the front. He was tall and imposing, his armor marked with symbols that glowed like Elara's. "Surrender the artifact," the rebel leader demanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. "And I might let the human live." Jack raised his rifle, stepping protectively in front of Elara. "You want her, you'll have to go through me." The rebel leader laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "So be it." As the room erupted into chaos once more, Jack realized one thing. This fight was only the beginning. The escape plan. The Starblade sat motionless in the clearing, its hull scorched from the battle. Smoke rose lazily from the engines, and sparks flickered where panels had been blown open. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was tense. Ethan, the ship's engineer, slammed his fist against a console in frustration. "We're dead in the water, Commander," Ethan growled, wiping soot from his face. "Engines are fried, and the main power core is barely holding together. We're not flying out of here anytime soon." Jack Harper stood at the center of the ship's bridge, his jaw clenched as he considered their options. The battle with the rebels had left them stranded on the hostile Zyranian planet. Princess Elara was seated nearby, her glowing eyes scanning the damaged interior of the ship. "So, what now?" Sarah Kane asked, pacing back and forth. "We've got a broken ship, a planet full of rebels, and no way to call for backup." "Fantastic." Elara stood, her posture regal despite the situation. "There's a solution," she said calmly, "but it won't be easy." Jack turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "I'm listening." Elara stepped closer to the ship's holographic map, her fingers brushing the controls. A section of the map lit up, revealing a jagged mountain range dotted with strange symbols. "This is the Hallowed Ridge," Elara explained. "The rebels have a base there. They're using it to store resources and weapons. If we can infiltrate it, we might find the components you need to repair your ship." Ethan snorted. "You're suggesting we stroll into a heavily armed rebel base, steal their stuff, and walk out? Sounds like a suicide mission." "It's the only way," Elara said firmly. "The rebels won't stop hunting us. If we stay here, we're sitting ducks." Jack studied the map, his mind racing. The odds were terrible, but Elara was right. Staying put meant certain death. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "We'll split up. Ethan and Sarah, you stay here and work on stabilizing the ship. Elara and I will head to the base and retrieve the parts." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but Jack silenced him with a look. "We don't have a choice, Ethan. If this works, we live. If it doesn't, well, we're not living long enough to regret it. Elara nodded. I'll guide you. I know the terrain and the rebel defenses. Jack grabbed his rifle and motioned for Elara to follow. Let's move. The journey to the hallowed ridge was grueling. The dense jungle was alive with strange sounds, alien creatures that rustled in the shadows, their glowing eyes watching from the darkness. The air was thick and humid, making every step feel like a struggle. You've done this before, haven't you? Jack asked, glancing at Elara as they navigated the rough terrain. She didn't look back. Escaped rebels. Fled for my life. More times than I'd like to admit. Jack smirked despite himself. You're full of surprises, Princess. Elara stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. Quiet. Jack froze, his finger hovering over the trigger of his rifle. A faint clicking sound echoed through the jungle, growing louder. Motion sensors, Elara whispered. The rebels used them to track intruders. Jack scanned the area, his sharp eyes catching the faint glint of metal buried in the foliage. I see it. Can you disable it? Elara shook her head. It's too risky. We'll have to go around. They moved cautiously, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. The closer they got to the ridge, the more heavily guarded the area became. Rebel patrols roamed the paths, their weapons glowing ominously in the dim light. When they finally reached the edge of the base, Jack crouched behind a rock, surveying the scene. The base was a sprawling complex of angular buildings carved into the mountainside. Guards were stationed at every entrance, and drones buzzed overhead. Looks like a fortress, Jack muttered. There's a way in, Elara said, pointing to a narrow ventilation shaft on the side of one building. It leads to the storage area. From there, we can access the main supply room. Jack frowned. You're sure? Elara's glowing eyes met his. I've escaped from here before. Trust me. The ventilation shaft was a tight squeeze, and the metallic walls echoed with every movement. Jack led the way, his rifle slung across his back. Elara followed close behind, her breathing steady. When they emerged into the storage area, Jack's eyes widened. The room was filled with crates of advanced equipment, much of it human in origin. Human tech, he muttered. How the hell did they get this? Later, Elara whispered, we need the parts for your ship. They moved quickly, gathering what they needed. Jack's arms were full when the sound of footsteps made him freeze. Guards, Elara hissed. Jack ducked behind a crate, motioning for Elara to do the same. Two rebels entered the room, their conversation in Zyranian echoing off the walls. Jack's hand tightened around his rifle. If they were discovered, the mission was over. As the rebels moved closer, Elara reached out, her hand glowing faintly. The light pulsed, and the guards suddenly stopped, their eyes glazing over. What did you do? Jack whispered. A distraction. Elara replied, her voice low. But it won't last long. Let's go. They slipped out of the storage room, the stolen parts in tow. The journey back to the jungle was just as perilous. But Jack and Elara moved with purpose, their survival instincts kicking in. By the time they reached the Starblade, the sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the battered ship. Ethan and Sarah were waiting, their faces lighting up with relief as Jack and Elara appeared. Got what we need? Ethan asked. Jack tossed the parts to him. Get to work. We're not staying here a second longer than we have to. As Ethan dove into repairs, Jack turned to Elara. You're full of surprises, Princess. I think I'm starting to believe you might actually be worth the trouble. Elara smiled faintly, her glowing eyes reflecting the rising sun. And I think you might be more than just a human savior, Commander. The tension in the air hadn't lifted, but for the first time, there was a flicker of hope. The secret of the prophecy. The Starblade roared to life, its engine sparking with renewed energy as it lifted off the barren surface of the Zyranian planet. Jack Harper stood in the cockpit, his eyes fixed on the swirling darkness of space beyond the viewport. The ship was finally repaired, but the unease in his chest refused to subside. Behind him, Princess Elara sat quietly, her silver hair catching the light of the control panels. Her glowing eyes were distant, as if she were lost in a memory. Jack had noticed her silence growing heavier since their escape from the rebel base. "You've been holding out on me, Princess," Jack said, breaking the quiet. "Back there, with those guards, you didn't just distract them. You did something unnatural." Elara's gaze shifted to him, her expression unreadable. "You noticed. Kind of hard to miss when your hands start glowing and the enemy suddenly forgets how to breathe," Jack replied, his tone sharp but curious. "Care to explain?" Elara sighed, standing and moving toward the viewport. The vastness of space reflected in her glowing eyes, making her seem even more otherworldly. "There's something you need to know," she began. "Something I've kept hidden because I wasn't sure you'd understand." Jack folded his arms, leaning against the console. "Try me." Elara hesitated, then spoke. "The artifact we retrieved, the heart of Zynara, isn't just an object. It's alive. It's a source of immense power, tied to the lifeblood of my people. And to me." Jack frowned. "Tied to you? How?" "My family has protected the artifact for generations," Elara explained. "But it's more than that. The artifact's energy runs through my veins. That's why I glow. That's why the rebels want me." Jack's brow furrowed. "They want you, as a battery." Elara's laugh was bitter. "Not quite. The heart is unstable, Commander. It requires a bond to function, a connection to someone who can channel its power without destroying themselves. That someone is me." Jack let her words sink in. He'd seen plenty of strange things in his time, but this was beyond anything he'd dealt with before. "And what happens if the rebels get their hands on it?" he asked. Elara turned to him, her glowing eyes filled with sorrow. "If they force the heart to bond with them, it will destroy Zynara. The energy will collapse, taking the planet, and likely the galaxy, with it." The weight of her words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. "So, no pressure then." Before Elara could respond, Sarah's voice crackled through the comms. "Commander, you need to get to the briefing room. Now." In the briefing room, the entire crew was gathered around the holographic display. Ethan's face was pale, and Sarah looked like she'd just seen a ghost. "What's going on?" Jack demanded. Sarah pointed to the hologram, which displayed intercepted transmissions from the rebels. "We've been monitoring their comms since we left the planet. They're mobilizing a fleet, and they're headed for the Heart's Temple." Jack's jaw tightened. "They're planning to take it by force." "It's worse than that," Ethan added grimly. "They'd got something new, a weapon powered by human technology. If they use it, they could wipe out the entire temple, Elara included." The room fell silent. "They can't activate the heart without me," Elara said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "They don't need to activate it," Jack said, his mind racing. "If they destroy it, the energy collapse will do the rest." Ethan slammed his fist on the table. "Then we've got to stop them." Jack nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on Elara. "There's more to this, isn't there? The prophecy. What does it say?" Elara hesitated, then recited the words she'd grown up hearing. "When Zynara stands on the brink of ruin, the stars will send a savior. A human, bound by fate, will restore balance through an unbreakable bond." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Unbreakable bond? What does that mean?" Elara's cheeks flushed faintly, and she looked away. "The bond is sealed through marriage." The room went completely still. "Marriage," Ethan blurted, breaking the silence. "Like actual marriage." Elara nodded, her voice soft. "It's an ancient tradition. The heart can only stabilize if the one who protects it forms a bond of unity. The prophecy says that bond must be with the human savior." Jack blinked, caught off guard. "And you think I'm this savior?" "I don't just think it," Elara said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know it. The heart chose you when we retrieved it from the temple. I felt it. Jack ran a hand through his hair, trying to process what he was hearing. This is insane. You're telling me that to save your planet, I have to marry you. It's not just about saving my planet, Elara said, stepping closer to them. It's about saving everyone. The rebels won't stop with Zynara. If they master this power, the entire galaxy will burn. Jack stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He was a soldier, a commander, a man who thrived in chaos. But this was something else entirely. All right, he said finally. We'll deal with the marriage thing later. Right now, we focus on stopping the rebels. Elara's eyes softened with relief. Thank you, Jack. The moment was interrupted by the ship's alarm blaring through the speakers. Rebel ships incoming. Sarah shouted from the cockpit. Jack grabbed his rifle, adrenaline surging. Looks like the honeymoon's on hold. Let's get to work. The final stand. The rebel fleet descended like a storm, blotting out the stars as their ships closed in on the ancient temple. From the Starblade's bridge, Jack Harper stood with his arms crossed, studying the incoming threat. The temple glowed faintly below, its energy pulsing like a heartbeat, as if sensing the danger. 20 ships, Sarah Kane reported, her voice tight with tension. Heavily armed, and they're deploying ground forces. We're outnumbered and outgunned. Nothing new, Jack replied, a grim smirk tugging at his lips. Ethan groaned from his station. You've got a weird way of looking at things, Commander. This isn't just bad odds. It's suicide. We don't have to win, Jack said, turning to his crew. We just have to hold them off long enough for Elara to do what she needs to do. Behind him, Princess Elara entered the bridge, her presence commanding despite the chaos outside. Her silver hair shimmered, and her glowing eyes burned with determination. I'm ready, she said simply. Jack turned to her, his expression softening for a moment. You sure about this? Elara nodded. The heart must be activated to stabilize its energy, and I'm the only one who can do it. But I'll need time. At least 30 minutes. We'll get you that time, Jack said, his voice steady. He looked back at the crew. Sarah, coordinate the ship's defenses. Ethan, prep the auxiliary cannons. I'll lead the ground team to protect the temple entrance. And me? Elara asked. You're going inside, Jack said firmly. Once you activate the heart, this ends. On the ground, the Starblade landed with a thunderous roar, its defensive shields flickering as rebel ships opened fire. Jack and his team emerged, weapons drawn, as rebel ground forces stormed the area. Hold the line, Jack barked, his plasma rifle lighting up the battlefield. The rebels fought with ruthless precision, their glowing weapons clashing against Zyranian defenders. The air was thick with smoke and the sound of battle, but Jack's focus never wavered. Jack, Elara's voice crackled through his comm. I'm inside the temple, but something's wrong. The heart, it's resisting me. Jack ducked behind a fallen column, firing off another round. What do you mean, resisting? The energy is unstable, Elara replied. It's like it's waiting for something, or someone. Jack's stomach sank. He knew what she meant, but now wasn't the time to argue. Keep trying, Princess, he said. We'll buy you more time. Inside the temple, Elara knelt before the heart of Zynara, her hands trembling as she tried to connect with its energy. The artifact pulsed erratically, its light flickering like a dying star. Why won't you stabilize? She whispered, frustration and desperation in her voice. The heart responded with a surge of energy that knocked her back, its glow dimming further. The rebel leader. Outside, Jack's heart raced as a figure emerged from the chaos. The rebel leader, clad in dark, glowing armor, the leader wielded a weapon that seemed to hum with power. Harper, the leader called out, his voice amplified. Step aside. You can't win this. Jack smirked, raising his rifle. Funny. I was about to say the same to you. The rebel leader charged, his weapon slicing through the air with a blinding arc of energy. Jack barely dodged the attack, firing back as he rolled behind cover. "You're fighting a losing battle," the leader taunted. Jack gritted his teeth. "Yeah, well, I've got a habit of making bad bets." The bond. Inside the temple, Elara gasped as a vision overtook her. She saw Jack, standing defiant against the rebel leader, his determination unwavering. The heart pulsed again, this time in response to her emotions. It's him, she realized. The bond. It's waiting for him. Grabbing her comm, she called out, "Jack, you need to come inside now." "I'm a little busy," Jack shouted back, narrowly avoiding another strike from the rebel leader. "Jack, listen to me." Elara's voice was desperate. "The heart won't stabilize without you. It's the bond. The prophecy. You're the key." Jack froze for a split second, her words sinking in. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. The rebel leader seized the opportunity, landing a blow that sent Jack sprawling. As the leader raised his weapon for the final strike, Jack fired a shot straight into his chest, sending him crashing to the ground. Jack scrambled to his feet, yelling into the comm, "I'm on my way." The activation. Jack burst into the temple, battered and bloodied. Elara was waiting, her hands glowing as the heart pulsed wildly. "What do I do?" Jack asked, breathing heavily. "Take my hand," Elara said, holding hers out. "The bond will complete the circuit." Jack hesitated, then grasped her glowing hand. The moment their skin touched, the heart erupted with light, filling the room with an overwhelming energy. Outside, the battlefield froze as a shockwave burst from the temple, disabling the rebel ships and weapons. The rebels fell to their knees, their leader clutching his chest in agony. Victory. As the light faded, Jack and Elara stood at the center of the temple, their hands still joined. The heart pulsed steadily now, its energy calm and controlled. "You did it," Jack said, looking at Elara. "We did it," she corrected, her glowing eyes meeting his. Jack smiled faintly, then winced as he noticed the burns on his arm. "Next time, let's skip the prophecy part." Elara chuckled softly. "Next time, I'll warn you sooner." Outside, the rebels retreated, their forces broken. The battle was over, but Jack knew the war was far from done. Sacrifice and revelation. The heart of Zirin pulsed steadily now, bathing the ancient temple in a warm golden light. Jack Harper stood in the center of the chamber, his hands still tingling from the surge of energy. Beside him, Princess Elara looked drained, her glowing eyes dimmer than before, but her determination remained steadfast. "It's stable for now," Elara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the bond is incomplete. Without the final step, the heart's energy will collapse again." Jack frowned, wiping sweat and soot from his face. "Final step? You mean the unbreakable bond thing?" Elara hesitated, her gaze dropping to the glowing artifact at their feet. "Yes, the heart requires a permanent link, one forged through unity. Without it, the stabilization is temporary." Jack exhaled sharply, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "You're saying we have to go through with the whole marriage part of the prophecy?" "It's not just about marriage," Elara said, stepping closer. "It's about trust, commitment, and the connection between us. The heart needs that bond to sustain its power." Jack's instinct was to argue, to find another way out, but the urgency in Elara's eyes told him there was no alternative. Before he could respond, Sarah's voice crackled through the comm. "Commander, we've got a problem," she said. "Rebel forces are regrouping, and their flagship just entered orbit. It's massive." Jack groaned, rubbing his temples. "Of course it is. What else?" "They've got a planetary disruptor," Sarah continued. "If they fire that thing, it'll obliterate everything. Temple, heart, and us included." Elara's expression darkened. "They're desperate. If they can't have the heart, they'll destroy it." Jack clenched his fists, his mind racing. How long until they're in firing range? 10 minutes, maybe less, Sarah replied. Great, Jack muttered, turning back to Elara. We don't have time to argue about traditions. Let's do this. The ritual. The air inside the temple grew heavier as Elara prepared the ritual. The ancient carvings on the walls glowed with a soft light, and the heart of Ziran pulsed in time with their movements. You need to stand here, Elara instructed, motioning to a circular platform in front of the heart. Jack stepped onto the platform, feeling the energy hum beneath his boots. This is a lot more ceremonial than I expected, he said, trying to mask his nerves with humor. Elara ignored his comment, placing her hands on the heart. The artifact glowed brighter, and a column of light shot upward, connecting to the temple ceiling. Repeat after me, she said, her voice steady. Jack hesitated, then nodded. All right, let's get this over with. As Elara began reciting the ancient Zyranian words, Jack did his best to follow along. The light around them grew stronger, enveloping them in a cocoon of energy. Jack felt a strange warmth spreading through his chest, like a piece of the heart was embedding itself in his very being. The attack. Outside, the rebel flagship loomed closer, its massive disruptor cannon charging. On the ground, rebel troops launched a desperate assault on the temple, their weapons lighting up the battlefield. Ethan and Sarah manned the Starblade's defensive systems, firing at the advancing forces. They're coming in too fast, Sarah shouted. Just hold them off, Ethan yelled back. Jack needs more time. The rebels pressed forward, their numbers overwhelming. Explosions shook the ground, and the temple walls trembled. The heart's power. Inside the temple, Jack and Elara were surrounded by an almost blinding light. The energy from the heart surged, flowing through their connected hands. It's almost complete, Elara said, her voice strained. Just a few more seconds. Jack felt the weight of the energy coursing through him. It was overwhelming, but at the same time, it felt right. He looked at Elara, and for the first time, he saw not just a princess but a partner. We're in this together, he said firmly. Elara met his gaze and nodded. Together. With those words, the heart unleashed a final brilliant pulse of energy. The temple walls shook, and the rebels outside were thrown back by an invisible force. The disruptor cannon on the rebel flagship shorted out, sparks flying as its systems failed. The aftermath. The battlefield fell silent as the heart's energy rippled across the planet, restoring balance to the temple and disarming the rebels. The remaining rebel forces fled, their leader captured by the Zyranian warriors. Inside the temple, Jack and Elara stood in the center of the glowing chamber. The bond was complete, and the heart now pulsed with a steady, calm light. It's done, Elara said softly, looking at Jack with a mixture of relief and gratitude. Jack nodded, his usual smirk returning. So, does this mean I'm officially royalty now? Elara laughed, the tension finally breaking. Something like that. Ethan's voice came through the comm. Commander, you might want to get out here. The rebels are retreating, but they left behind a parting gift. Jack sighed, his smirk fading. Guess we're not done yet. A new alliance. The Starblade hovered silently above the Zyranian temple, its polished hull reflecting the soft glow of the heart of Ziran, now restored to its full power. Inside the ship, Jack Harper sat at the central table in the briefing room, his crew gathered around him. The adrenaline from the battle had faded, replaced by an uneasy quiet. This isn't over, Jack said, breaking the silence. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much, too fast. You think the rebels will regroup? Sarah Kane asked, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. They always do, Jack replied, his gaze shifting to Princess Elara, who stood at the viewport, her glowing eyes scanning the stars. They've lost their leader, Elara said without turning around. And without the heart, their plans for domination are over. But you're right. They won't stop completely. Not as long as they believe Zynara is vulnerable. Ethan huffed, rubbing his temples. So, what now? We just keep fighting them forever? No, Elara said, her voice firm. We rebuild. And this time, we won't do it alone. The ceremony. A week later, the Heart's temple was restored, its once crumbling walls now glowing with renewed energy. Zyranians from across the planet gathered in the sacred space, their shimmering robes and glowing features creating a surreal atmosphere. Jack stood at the edge of the crowd, feeling out of place. His uniform, stained from battles past, contrasted sharply with the elegance of the Zyranian garments. He shifted uncomfortably as Elara approached, her silver hair adorned with intricate ornaments that sparkled in the temple's light. You clean up nicely, Commander, Elara said, a teasing smile on her lips. Jack chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. You're not so bad yourself, Princess. The ceremony began, an ancient Zyranian elder stepping forward to speak. The words were foreign to Jack, but their meaning was clear. This wasn't just about the heart or the prophecy. It was about unity. When it was time for the bond to be recognized, Elara turned to Jack, holding out her hand. You sure about this? Jack asked, his voice low. I've never been more sure of anything, Elara replied. Jack took her hand, and the heart pulsed once more, its light spreading through the temple and into the sky. It was a symbol of hope, a beacon to the galaxy that Zyrana and humanity were united. The new alliance. Back on the Starblade, the crew prepared for their next mission. Jack stood on the bridge, watching as Zyranian ships joined their formation. The sight was something he never thought he'd see. Two vastly different species working together. So, what's the plan now? Ethan asked, leaning against the console. Jack smirked. We've got a lot of work to do. The rebels might be scattered, but there's plenty of cleanup to handle, and we got a new alliance to cement. And you? Sarah asked, her tone softer. How's it feel being bonded to a Zyranian princess? Jack glanced toward the viewport, where Elara was speaking with one of her advisors. Her laughter carried faintly through the comms, and Jack couldn't help but smile. It's different, he admitted, but in a good way. The shadow in the stars. As the Starblade and its new Zyranian allies began their journey, a lone figure watched from the edge of the galaxy. Clad in dark armor, the figure's piercing eyes scanned the glowing light of Zyrana with a mix of anger and intrigue. They think it's over, the figure murmured, their voice low and menacing. But this is just the beginning. Behind them, a fleet of shadowy ships loomed, their engines humming with unfamiliar power. Let them celebrate. Soon, they'll see the truth. Ending. On the Starblade, Jack and Elara stood side by side, gazing at the endless expanse of stars. Do you think we'll ever find peace? Elara asked softly. Jack shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. Peace is overrated. Adventure, though, that's worth fighting for. Elara laughed, the sound light and genuine. Then I suppose we have plenty of that ahead. The two stood in silence for a moment longer, their bond, both literal and figurative, stronger than ever. Let's get to work, Jack said, turning toward the bridge. As the Starblade jumped into hyperspace, its engines blazing, the galaxy waited. And so did the shadows.